songs and dances with warrior steps to say no to a new term for President Faure Gnassingbe. On June 6th, the 14 opposition political parties began their series of demonstrations in Lomé, the Togolese capital, and in several cities across the country. The protesters are determined. They are calling on the economic community of West African states.
I want to address the president of ECOWAS. If there was no alternation, you would not have come to power in your countries. We want alternation in Togo.
Now Faure must leave power, let him hand over power to the people, and we ourselves will choose whom we want.
Among the opposition leaders, there appears to be a return to the streets by the Pan-African National Party. Together, they say yes to the constitutional revision bill introduced in the National Assembly by ECOWAS, but reject their opponent's plan, which would allow President Faure Gnassingbe to run for a third term.
The crisis resolution process is at a standstill. ECOWAS has taken on the significant and important responsibility of helping to resolve the ongoing crisis. We strongly call on ECOWAS to make resolute and unwavering decisions without hesitation when the time comes. The future and well-being of more than 7 million people is truly at stake.
On the ruling party's side, they intend to move on to the next phase against their political opponents. In the National Assembly, a deadlock is looming over the vote on the ECOWAS constitutional revision bill. As for the protesters, they intend to continue their movement until their demands are met. The flames of resistance have finally reached Lomé. It began at dawn, not with gunfire, but with footsteps. Thousands, then tens of thousands, marching through the capital with banners in one hand and the Constitution in the other. From the universities to the markets, the chant was the same: 57 years is enough. Faure must go. No more dynasties. After decades of silence, something snapped. Togo, long considered one of the most tightly controlled regimes in West Africa, had reached its breaking point. It wasn't one event that triggered it. It was a lifetime of buried fury. The Gnassingbe family had ruled since 1967. First the father, Eyadema, then the son, Faure. Combined, they had ruled longer than most Togolese have been alive. But this morning, the people rose. Massive crowds filled Lomé's streets. Not just youth, but elders. Not just activists, but mothers. Not just opposition parties, the people themselves. Photos began flooding social media, city squares overflowing with protesters, students raising homemade flags reading Libre ou rien, freedom or nothing. Women in traditional dress holding signs that said, "We buried your father, now we bury your regime." And then the internet slowed. The government tried to clamp down, blocked Twitter, slowed WhatsApp, disrupted mobile networks. But it was too late. The world was watching. And so was West Africa. Footage leaked showing government security forces in riot gear, armed, ready. But something unexpected happened. Some police units began to pull back, others refused to attack. One officer was caught whispering to a protester, "I'm tired too." By mid-afternoon, every major road into Lomé was blocked, not by the military, but by the people. This wasn't just a protest, it was a declaration. Togo had finally spoken, and the words were not soft. "You stole our future, now we're taking it back." To understand Togo's uprising, you must understand the dynasty. For nearly 6 decades, one name ruled the nation, Gnassingbe. It began in 1967. General Gnassingbe Eyadema seized power in a military coup. He promised order, strength, and independence. Instead, Togo got a dictatorship wrapped in military parades and foreign handshakes. Eyadema held the country in an iron grip for 38 years, the longest-serving president in African history at the time. Opposition leaders disappeared. Elections were a ritual, not a choice. The streets whispered his name in fear, not in pride. Then, in 2005, he died suddenly. And within hours, before the people could grieve, before a vote could be held, the military installed his son, Faure Gnassingbe, as president. No transition. No debate, no consent. The people erupted, protests swept the country, and the government responded with bullets. Nearly 500 civilians were killed in the crackdown that followed Faure's rise. But the West said little. France called for calm. The United States said Togo was a key ally in the region. And so, the dynasty survived. Faure's rule became a smoother version of his father's. Polished speeches, global investment forums, smiling handshakes with Macron. But underneath, the same oppression, constitutional amendments that extended his power, elections rigged behind velvet curtains, journalists silenced, activists exiled. For 19 years, Faure ruled with a quiet fist, never loud but always firm, until now. Now, the silence is broken. Now, the people remember. Now, the dynasty faces something it hasn't in 57 years, a nation that no longer fears it. As one elder told a reporter, "His father stole our youth. Faure will not steal our children's future." And with each passing hour, more voices rise to say, "The crown was never yours, and now we're taking it back." Sometimes, it only takes a spark, and in Togo, that spark was a leak. Late at night, a classified government memo made its way onto Telegram. It wasn't just a rumor, it wasn't a fake, it was a bombshell. The document revealed that President Faure Gnassingbe, already in power for nearly 2 decades, was preparing a constitutional revision, one that could erase term limits entirely, one that would allow him to stay in power until 2033 or longer. The people were stunned, then they were angry, then they stood up. Because they remembered 2019, when the constitution had already been quietly changed to restart the clock on Faure's terms. They remembered the promises of modernization, transition, economic stability, and they remembered nothing changed. This time, it was different. The youth refused to be fooled again. Social media exploded with screenshots of the memo. Voice notes spread like wildfire. This isn't a president, this is a king in a suit, and kings must fall. Within 24 hours, protest calls swept through every campus, market, and mosque. Every family had a story. A cousin jailed, a job lost, a village ignored. And in every voice, there was one common thread. Enough is enough. The opposition parties tried to calm things, calling for dialogue. But the people had moved past dialogue. They had waited for 57 years. They weren't asking anymore. It wasn't just politics. It was personal. A young protester screamed into a megaphone, "We are not your children. We are not your slaves. We are the generation that will end this dynasty." The streets answered in one thunderous voice, "Togo debout! Togo, rise up!" The trigger had been pulled, and now the regime was running out of time. Because this wasn't just protest, this was a countdown. This time, it wasn't the politicians who led the charge. It wasn't the elites or the opposition parties. It was the youth. They came in waves, not just with anger, but with strategy. Students, artists, young vendors, tech workers. Not armed, but organized. Encrypted group chats became command centers. Twitter threads turned into protest maps. Street slogans became national chants. We were born under dictatorship. We refuse to die in it. In Lomé, thousands of young people stormed the streets, wrapped in the flag, faces uncovered, shouting Faure's name not in fear, but in defiance. They blocked roads with school desks and overturned taxis. They shut down intersections with sheer numbers. Some carried signs that read, "This is not rebellion, this is remembrance." Because for them, this wasn't just about the leaked document. It was about growing up in silence, watching parents whisper at dinner tables, watching elections feel like theatre, watching dreams crushed by a name they didn't choose, but were born under. One girl, just 17, looked straight into a camera and said, "My father feared Ayadama. My brother feared Faure. I fear no one." Online, videos of youth-led protests went viral across Africa. Other countries watched in awe. "Togo is standing. Are we next?" asked a Malian blogger. In the chaos, something beautiful formed. Students protecting elders in the crowd. Young women organizing water stations for protesters. Techies jamming surveillance signals to protect organizers. It was more than protest. It was a movement, agile, fearless, and relentless. And as night fell, they refused to go home. They lit fires, not in destruction, but in declaration. "We are the future," they sang. and we are here now. The regime underestimated them. But what Faure Gnassingbe didn't realize was this. The youth of Togo were not born to inherit fear, they were born to end it. The regime finally struck back. Just after sunrise, the sound of sirens echoed through Lomé. Riot trucks rolled in. Lines of armed police and gendarmes marched toward the crowds. Their orders were clear. Break the spirit, end the movement, silence the street. But they were too late. As the first canisters of tear gas exploded, the crowd didn't scatter. They stood their ground. Teenagers soaked scarves in vinegar. Nurses formed human shields around the injured. Young men threw back tear gas canisters with bare hands. In Tokoin, riot police charged and met a wall of linked arms. In Bay, protesters built makeshift barricades with trash bins and burning tires. In Amutive, chants drowned out sirens. We're not afraid, we're not alone. And for the first time in years, the people didn't run. One protest leader, covered in dust and sweat, shouted into a megaphone, "Let them gas us, let them shoot, we will still be here tomorrow." Across the city, videos showed something the regime feared most: police hesitation. Some officers lowered their weapons, others looked away. A few, the bravest, removed their helmets and walked off the line entirely. One was caught on video whispering, "I have a daughter, I can't keep doing this." That clip went viral. By midday, journalists were reporting internal splits within the security forces. Anonymous officers sent messages to organizers, warning them of raids, but also offering protection. The regime had relied on fear for decades, but now fear was defecting, and Faure Gnassingbe, he remained silent. Inside his palace, cameras showed heavy police presence. Helicopters circled overhead, but outside, in the streets, the people held their position. Because when the police arrived with batons, Togo answered with bravery. When they brought force, Togo brought faith. This was no longer a protest, this was resistance, and the people were no longer running. They were standing, for the first time in generations. By the 6th day, Togo was no longer just rising, it was boiling. The protests had spread far beyond Lomé. Cities once considered quiet, Sokode, Kara, Atakpame, were now rumbling with unrest. Roads were blocked, schools shut down, government offices deserted. The regime tried to maintain calm, but everyone knew the truth. The country was slipping from their hands. Whispers came out of the military barracks. Some soldiers had been refusing orders. Others locked their weapons in the armory and disappeared into the crowd. One audio message, recorded in secret, leaked to the public. "We signed up to defend the nation, not one man's throne." It spread like wildfire. And suddenly, the people weren't just fighting for freedom, they believed they might actually win. In Lomé, government ministers were seen leaving buildings with escorts. The national TV station reduced its programming. And inside the presidential compound, silence. Faure Gnassingbe had not spoken. Not to the nation, not to the press, not even to his own people. Instead, sources say he was holding closed-door emergency meetings with French advisors and regional intelligence officers. But time was running out. Every hour, the crowds grew. Every hour, more uniforms disappeared from the street. Every hour, the chant got louder. "He will fall! He will fall!" The opposition parties tried to catch up, but the people were no longer listening to speeches. They were listening to each other. One elderly man stood before a courthouse in Lomé and declared, "I've seen 4 coups. I've seen 3 constitutions, but I've never seen the people like this. This is not rebellion. This is a rebirth." Togo wasn't asking anymore. Togo was demanding. And as the capital held its breath, one truth hung in the air. The regime was not fighting to govern. It was fighting to survive. After nearly a week of silence, the nation waited. Speculation filled the streets. Was Faure on a plane to Paris? Was the army still loyal? Would he resign? Then, suddenly, every state channel went dark, and just minutes later, they returned with a single image. Faure Gnassingbe, seated in a gold-trimmed chair, alone, expression unreadable, a flag behind him, a microphone in front. The long-awaited address had begun, but what came out of his mouth only poured fuel on the fire. "My fellow citizens," he began, What you see in the streets is not a popular uprising. It is the work of foreign agents, radicalized youth, and enemies of stability. Gasps rippled across households. Phones buzzed with disbelief. People gathered in cafes and marketplaces, listening in stunned silence. He continued, "We have preserved peace for decades. Togo is a respected partner of the international community, and we will not be destabilized by those who seek to plunge us into chaos. Not a word about the leaked memo. Not a word about the lives lost. Not a word about stepping down. Instead, he blamed the people." On the streets, the response was immediate. Crowds erupted in fury. Chants turned into roars. "You lied for 57 years. You won't lie one more day. Foreign agents didn't starve us. You did." Even longtime supporters of the regime were silent. Some turned off their televisions. Others removed Faure's portrait from offices and walls. In the army, sources reported growing unease. One senior officer was overheard saying, "If that's the best he has, he's already gone." The regime had miscalculated. This wasn't the 1990s. This wasn't the silent generation. The youth of Togo had seen too much, endured too long, and were now too united to be silenced by a speech full of denial. Faure had spoken, but he didn't calm the nation. He ignited it. While Faure tried to hold his crumbling palace together, something powerful was happening across the northern border. Africa was responding, but not the Africa of foreign diplomats and quiet press releases. This was the new Africa, bold, unapologetic, and sovereign. Within hours of Faure's failed speech, the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, led by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, released a joint statement. "We, the nations of the Sahel, stand with the people of Togo in their pursuit of freedom, dignity, and sovereignty. We warn all foreign powers, let no one interfere in the will of the Togolese people." It was short, but it was thunder, and it shook the region. In Ouagadougou, Captain Ibrahim Traoré appeared on national television with a message that cut through the fog of political games. "When a people rise, we do not ask who they are. We ask what they suffer, and if they rise in truth, then we rise with them." Crowds in Mali and Niger cheered as the statement aired. AES flags began to appear in Togolese protests. Some demonstrators wore red headbands, the symbol of resistance in the Sahel. Others raised signs that read, "From Bamako to Lomé, the empire falls today," and it wasn't just words. AES intelligence services reportedly alerted Togolese activists of possible foreign-backed disinformation campaigns. Encrypted satellite phones were donated to protest leaders. AES radio stations began covering Togo's uprising hour by hour, defying the blackout from Western and regional media. Meanwhile, France was quiet. The United States issued a vague call for restraint, but West Africa knew what that meant. Stall, control, delay. AES refused. Their message was simple. This is not a Togolese problem. It's an African awakening. For the first time, Togo's fight was no longer alone. It was part of something bigger, a wave, a movement, a storm. And Faure Gnassingbe, he wasn't just facing his own people now. He was facing a continent rising. In Paris, the lights were on all night. Briefings rushed across desks. Urgent cables left embassies. And behind closed doors, the question no one wanted to ask was being whispered in panic. Is Togo next? The uprising in Lomé had already spread across Africa's social media like wildfire, but now it was beginning to do something far more dangerous. Inspire. In Ivory Coast, whispers of protests. In Gabon, students posted Faure's face crossed out with red ink. Even in Senegal, where protests had recently flared, the chant returned. "We are all Togolese now." And for the West, this was bad news. Togo had been a safe partner, a reliable ally, a quiet corner in West Africa where France could train soldiers, run logistics, and move money without interruption. The Gnassingbe dynasty had long been a pillar of quiet neo-colonial control, and now that pillar was crumbling. Inside the Élysée Palace, French intelligence warned that AES support for the protests could destabilize France's long-term interests in the region. One leaked memo read, "If Togo falls to popular revolt, the dominoes accelerate." Meanwhile, in Washington, the State Department issued a bland statement. "We urge all sides to remain calm and respect democratic principles." But privately, US advisors were watching AES with growing suspicion. Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, now rallying around Togo. That wasn't just defiance, that was contagion. And worse, they weren't doing it through UN speeches or backdoor deals. They were doing it openly, unapologetically, and with receipts. The West's usual levers, aid threats, IMF pressure, embassy whispers, weren't working because the people didn't want deals. They wanted dignity, and now even fear had failed. A French journalist summed it up best. If Togo rises, France may not be able to sit down again in West Africa. And Faure Gnassingbe, he was no longer just defending his regime, he was holding back a tidal wave, one that neither Paris, nor Washington, nor the UN could stop. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the people were already gathered. This wasn't a protest anymore. This was a deadline. In the heart of Lomé, leaders of the uprising stood atop makeshift platforms, their voices echoing through crowds packed shoulder to shoulder. There were no suits, no microphones, just fire in their eyes, and a simple message. Faure Gnassingbe has 72 hours to resign. Cheers erupted. 72 hers, 72 hers. The call wasn't just symbolic, it was surgical. They had mapped out their strategy: citywide shutdowns, border blockades, total paralysis of the regime's economy. You've ruled for 19 years, you inherited a stolen crown. Now the people are taking it back, minute by minute. By afternoon, posters plastered across Lomé read, "The countdown begins now." Faure's government was silent. State TV played old reruns. The presidential palace was locked down. Helicopters hovered above, but even they seemed lost. Meanwhile, AES flags flew higher in the crowd. Burkinabe volunteers were reportedly helping organize communications. Malian activists offered legal support. Africa was watching, and this time, it was not blinking. Foreign embassies began evacuating personnel. France closed its consular services. A leaked EU memo warned, the fall of Lomé may trigger region-wide collapse of France-friendly regimes. But on the ground, the people weren't talking about collapse. They were talking about rebirth. One woman, wrapped in the national flag, looked straight into a camera and said, "We were born under Faure. We were raised under Faure. But we will not die under Faure." The 72-hour ultimatum spread beyond borders. African youth reposted it. Diaspora groups lit up global cities, from Paris to New York, demanding the fall of the dynasty, and Faure. He said nothing. But history was already writing his final chapter, because when a people set a deadline, it's no longer a negotiation, it's a revolution, and the clock was ticking.
Welcome back. So the Gnassingbe family have ruled Togo over a little over half a century. And if you look at the country of Togo, which is in West Africa, the level of development is very low compared to neighboring countries in West Africa. You could clearly tell that the level of development is very low. Personally, I was in Togo a couple of weeks ago, and if I look at the various areas that I passed through, I would term all of them as villages that I passed through. The level of development is so low. If you look at infrastructure, there is no proper infrastructure over there. The people are really going through a lot, and quite recently there has been this protest against the rulership or the leadership of the country, President Faure Gnassingbe, who is the son of the previous Gnassingbe who was president, and after his father passed on, the son succeeded to become the president of the country. And I don't know if they do have a working constitution, a proper legislative system, a proper judiciary system. I don't know why one family could rule an entire country for over half a century. It is now that they are rising up. That is, the youth in the country are now rising up to the occasion. I believe that they are picking up inspiration from AES, that is countries in the Sahel regions, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Because if you look at the level of development that Burkina Faso in this few years of the regime of Captain Ibrahim Traore has been able to achieve, they are looking at it as an example for their country. The youth have stayed silent for quite too long, but in Burkina Faso, their leader has really helped in developing their country. And if you look at how the country is developing, within a few years' time, it will become one of the greatest countries in West Africa and even Africa at large. But it looks like some other African countries are picking some inspiration from what is happening in the Sahel states. And I think Togo is trying to follow suit. Beginning with this protest, I think this is a step in the right direction, because you cannot have just one family rule over the entire country for over half a century, and it is only this family that is taking control over the country. Meanwhile, there is no development that is happening in the country. Personally, if there is development that is happening in the country, I have no problem whatsoever with it if only one family rules the entire country. But in a situation whereby nothing goes to help the people in the country, but the family is the only family that is enjoying in the country, and the youth are going into very deplorable conditions. They are facing unemployment. There is high level of poverty, high level of crime, social vices, and all that in the society. It becomes a major thing to think about. But if there is development in the country, I do not see anything wrong with that. In the case of Togo, there isn't any much development in the country of Togo. So the youth going out there in order to protest against the 50-year rule of this particular family, I think is a step in the right direction, so that some reforms, constitutional reforms, can be made, so that any individual who goes for presidency can do that only for 2 terms, and after 2 terms, a new leader needs to be elected. And this is something that is done in almost every country in the world, and even in Africa here. I don't see why a particular family can hijack the leadership of the country and no one else is able to come in to also rule the country. I think the Sahel states are really doing a lot for Africa. They are really leading the charge in order to rekindle the spirit of Africans, particularly the youth in Africa, so that we can take our destinies in our own hands. Let me know what you also think about this in the comment section below. Share your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below, and don't forget to share this video with your friends and your family on other social media platforms like WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, X, TikTok, and other social media platforms. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Just click the subscribe button down here. Click on the subscribe button. Click as well on the notification bell. And I'd like to see you again in my next video.